Welcome everyone to Los Libertinos podcast. I am your host, Carlos Abelard. This is Chingazos and Fire, episode number 13. Our guest today is Daniel Coffeen. He is a crypto anarchist who holds a PhD in rhetoric from UC Berkeley. He wrote a book called Reading the Way of Things Towards a New Technology of Sense. He is also a contributor to Renegade University. He currently has a course that's called Introduction to Nietzsche. And next month, he will have a new course that will be dropping on Deleuze and Guattari or something like that. I try to pronounce it, but
say it any way you want.
Yeah. I'll put the links in the show notes, so you guys be sure to check that out. And Daniel, welcome to Los Libertinos.
Thanks, ma'am. I am honored and delighted.
Perfect. Yeah, so you know how kind of these things go. I know some of your background because I got introduced to you via the Unregistered podcast with Thad Russell. So over the years, you've been a frequent guest, and every time that you've been on, it's always been a fun experience mentally for me because most of the way that I do my podcast is I'm driving from job site to job site. I work in construction, so that's kind of what I do. But when I get to the job site after I hear some of you, I'm like, I feel like I'm a little bit walking in air a little bit, but it's all right. It's a good feeling. So for anybody that doesn't know you, could you please give a background narrative of, born, raised, family, siblings? You went from here to there to get to higher education. I mean, give us a good in-depth, because those building blocks will be able to get people to build on, so that way they can stand and see you eye to eye or hear you eye to eye,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So in case it's not really obvious, I come from New York, even though I've been in San Francisco for 30 years. In my family, higher education, I come from communist Jews in New York. And, so my mother's a PhD. My real father has a PhD. He left. I hadn't seen him since I was 5, and he's dead. My stepfather has a PhD. My brother is a lawyer. My sister, who passed a few years ago, was a lawyer. My grandfather was a lawyer. My uncle was a lawyer. He just died actually during lockdown. So, for me going, I didn't really have a choice, so I not only was there really no thinking about it, because school was so easy to me, so good at school that I never really questioned it. So I did well all through my high school, although I was motivated by sort of radical communist politics. And then I went to the University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, because my parents made me go basically to an Ivy League school, even though Penn's like the lesser Ivy. So of course I graduated in debt. And then, I knew what I wanted to study, right? Late in my college, because I was very bored in college. I thought I wanted to study history. And I would take these classes, and they would talk about wars and treaties and presidents. I was like, oh, that's so boring. Why is that history? And so what I actually ended up doing was specializing and writing about, for my undergraduate thesis, writing about what it is to write history. And I wrote about Michel Foucault, who was a French, it's called the postmodernist, whatever that means. He was sort of he upended a lot of what we think about history. And what turned me on so much, I realized, was the art and the practice of reading something really differently, right? Like he just upended all these assumptions I had about sexuality, about prisons, he in his great book, Discipline and Punish, he makes prisons look luxurious compared to elaborate torture and execution. I realized there's a rush from seeing the world differently, right? From taking something that's familiar and all of a sudden it becomes unfamiliar. And then you see it from a different angle, right? And it's sort of reborn. It's really like, it's a miracle, because it's bringing something that's kind of dead back to life. So I wanted to keep studying, French philosophy, postmodern philosophy. And at that time, there was only a couple of places in the country to do it. One was UC Berkeley Rhetoric Department. So I knew that's where I'd end up. I traveled the country all over the place. I lived in the South for a while, in Georgia and Texas, had ran into all kinds of hilarious versions of anti-Semitism. Don't really bother me all that much, but I come from New York. It was very shocking to me. Yeah, then I came out here. I applied to Berkeley. I have a lot of hesitations, like Thaddeus Russell, with the academy. Sort of had this vision that it would be this place where I would learn, read books, and learn and teach. And that's not what the academy is about. And I kind of ended up I didn't get fired, but I got run out of Berkeley for being too popular. I know that sounds insane and sounds like a weird ego thing. And there are plenty of other reasons to get rid of me, but that was actually the reason given to get rid of me. But what happened? Yeah.
So a lot of my audience will not know what postmodern is because
fair enough.
Tios, tias, primas, Sanchos, whatever is out there, they're not going to know what postmodern is. But what was it about that, or what is it about that turned you into, like, because it sounds like it was a game changer in your life to get that type of discipline to start seeing life or reading in that way, or however they kind of start viewing things.
Yeah, no, I realized, I had these high school. I went to public high school, small town outside Manhattan. And one of the teachers was an avowed sort of like communist. And he had us read all these these historians who are called revisionists, or they're doing these sort of Marxist critiques in which they read things differently. So one of the essays we read was by this historian called Gabriel Coco. And he argues that the formation of the USDA, right, that's like stamps our meat, grade A, isn't there to protect citizens. It was there to save the meat industry, right, after it had a terrible reputation, right, after Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle, and they saw the terrible conditions in the slaughterhouses. So I thought I was interested in the content of that essay. I thought I was interested in being this like communist and really rallying, to the cause of the people or something. But what I found out is what I was actually interested in was that fantastic moment where something I'd taken for granted was all of a sudden I was looking at it differently. So this switch he does of making the USDA a foil, right, by the government to protect corporations, right, despite everything it says is there to protect the people. And today that might sound obvious. As a grown-up, we know the government does that all the time, but I was 15 years old. And that was really exciting to me. And so I got into philosophy, I guess, and then this particular school called postmodern philosophy, but we don't have to use that name. It's just mostly sort of French philosophy of the 20th century, 21st century, that likes to take things apart. It likes to take no assumptions. What if we assume nothing, right? And we try to come to things constantly new. That's one way to kind of look at what I think they're up to in that whole school. And so it fit well with what interested me, which was this kind of exercise in seeing things differently, always. Street layouts, my house, how I parent, how I pour a drink, every single thing in my life. I enjoy not just questioning it, but seeing it differently, other than the ways that I haven't ever thought about before, rather than just being trained, from birth.
As a kid, or when was it natural to you to question everything, or did you come to it via this path?
Yeah, that's a great question. I thought that I was trained to question things, right? But what I realized I was doing was bringing a different ideology. In my mind, it was Marxism, to this other ideology, right, of sort of mainstream American political parties. But that was the questioning.
That was the questioning back and forth.
That's what I thought. And then I realized, no, I got to question everything, including the communists, including my will to question, right? It sort of brings into being a kind of vertigo, kind of free fall, right? Where so much of our culture is premised on being principled. What are your principles? I'm the opposite, right? I don't want any principles. My only principle is pleasure and difference, right? How can I and health and vitality, how can I live well? And how can this whole thing be organized so we all live well, right? So that's how I, of course, ended up a little thinking about the communists, right? Because it seemed like a structure in which we would all do well. And it wasn't until later, I was like, well, maybe there are better ways.
Yeah, for sure. I hear you. One of the in preparing for this interview, I start consuming the content of the person I'm going to interview. I went to your YouTube page and checked out most of the videos that you have up there. You have a separation of time there from like 10 years ago, and then you kind of did a lot more content about in the past year. But one of the videos that I consumed and I watched several times was one where it was the will to power. And the reason I liked it and I watched it again, because I watched it several times, was because in my life you always hear the word will, or or willpower, or you got to write a will or something like that, but no one's ever really explained it. Though the other time that I heard somebody explain what will was the lead singer for Pantera was talking about his will when he was trying to kick his heroin habit, and how he needed to have a will to do that. And he kind of explained it in an interview. And I remember thinking, man, I never thought that you can describe will. And then and you reference it against Nietzsche's I guess take, and you include your take in the mix. My question to you is, what type of relationship should we have with our will that allows us to like maximize the sensation that we even have a relationship with one?
Oh, geez, you're very good at this. These are great questions. The should is always a problem, right? Because the religious or the political will is to have you thinking you should be doing something. They have you thinking that whatever you're doing is wrong and you should be doing something else, right? For Nietzsche, or for sort of the school that I come from, or I believe in, or help create, is, I'll stop. I'll say Nietzsche says the formula for greatness, the formula for greatness, I love that expression already, right, is amor fati, right, which means love of fate. And he says you should, everything you've ever done, everything that's ever happened to you, everything, right? Every little burp, every pain, every broken leg, every death, everything. The task before us is to love it, not just tolerate it, not just accept it, but love it. Love your difference. Love everything that's happened to you, because you are this piece of the universe happening. There's no alternative. There's no ideal way to be. You go as you go. Right? It's a little different. It's not just you are what you are as if you're the fixed thing over time, but we're always these changing things, right? You picture a time lapse of a kid, right? Of any one of us, and physically we change, but also our ideas change, our relationships with other people change, and you are that part of the world. So the task is to not will it any other way. So no shoulds at all, just not even acceptance. The Buddhists and mindfulness talk a lot about accepting. Nietzsche says, no. The task for greatness, the formula for greatness, is to love everything about yourself.
That's awesome, because so this is, the parallels are cool, because I'm hearing you say this, and and I'll reference it back because that's how I know it, is that in that interview with the Pantera lead singer, he said something to the effect of like, love is like a flickering light, but when you connect love with will, it becomes like a lighthouse, and it'll bring you to harbor every time safely, to something like that. And he attached also will. He goes, will without love. So I don't know if we're saying the same thing, or if you guys are saying the same thing, kind of, but but the word love is in there. And can you maybe, I don't know, speak to that a little bit of the love will relationship that needs to be had,
Yeah, I mean, you think
if
about,
any?
yeah, well, all the ways we talk about things as sort of in public discourse and culture on Twitter and the news and how we're raised is to always constantly be judging. Very hard to speak and have people not think you're passing judgment, right? Think about trying to say to someone, "Oh, your hair, do you know this thing is sticking up?" Well, they get nervous. Are you judging me? Well, no, I'm just telling you a fact. Love is a kind of radical acceptance, right? It doesn't judge. It's so completely open to the world, right? And so, but Nietzsche changes it a little bit because he says it's not about loving the world. It's about loving life and hence yourself in that life. So he passes judgment all the time. And he says no to many things, but instead of saying no to them sort of across the board, he says, there are things I don't want because they're not good for me, right? Like fish makes me sick, or in his book, he all of a sudden starts talking about his diet. He says, coffee makes me very sick. Alcohol makes me very sick. Only eat very big meals in the morning. It's very strange. You're reading this book of philosophy, and all of a sudden he's spending all this time on his diet. But then he ends this whole section on the diet and he says, a rule for my morality, know the size of your own stomach. So his love is not, I have to just love everything in front of me. I don't have to just love all the food and all the people, because some of those people are bad for me. They make me sick. They drain me. So for him, it's an affirmation of yourself, right? Which is very different, I think, than Jesus talks about love, or the American poet Walt Whitman talks about it. And it's very embraces everything. Nietzsche just wants you to love yourself. But that is a task, right? It's not so easy. And I think that's where will comes in, right? To will yourself to not judge. We're all so neurotic, right? I don't know anyone who doesn't lie in bed at night at some point and judge themselves. I wish I did this. I wish I hadn't eaten that. I wish I hadn't said that. I wish I hadn't drinking so much, right? All these things we're constantly judging about ourselves. Imagine replacing that will, training yourself to have a will that just loved yourself and accepted it. And so it's work.
Yeah, I was about to say, but if he's bringing up his diet, and it sounds like when you bring up diet, then you're bringing up health also. You can't have a will that's going to destroy you unless, or is he saying that even if that's the case, if you're destroying yourself in that way, you love everything about it? Is that kind of,
and you're on the right, you're pushing on the right thing, which is it's sort of a paradox, right? Because it's love everything, but then, well, maybe love everything about myself. But one thing about myself is I don't love everything, right? So do I accept that? And so it's less about it is a kind of principle, but it's a principle that's not fixed. Right? And when he talks about the will to power, I think I talked about it in that talk, which was a long time ago. There really was a long pause. It is, he says, the sign of a great man, great person, strong person, is the person who instinctively chooses the things that make him healthier, more vital. They don't have to go on a diet on the internet and look out, oh, this is what's good for me. I should eat all this stuff. Who knows everybody's body is different. Know the size of your own stomach. So it's about aligning your very taste for the world with your own health. And now think about, I know plenty of people, and I myself among them, who instinctively do things that aren't good for them. Right? Somebody who just constantly eats crap food and then is sick all the time with digestive issues, but they keep doing it, right? So it's a feedback loop. It's a cycle down to death, down to nothing. And Nietzsche's trying through his books to sort of create or open up people to fostering a will that does the opposite, that creates a kind of feedback loop of health and vitality, that pushes themselves, right? But is everybody capable of becoming one of these great men that he talks about? I don't know. It's unclear. And you can begin to see how, for instance, the Nazis, who used Nietzsche, right, a lot in their own philosophy, it became a way to say, no,
they did. They did. I don't know.
Oh yeah, the Nazis went nuts for Nietzsche. And even though he goes out of his way in his writing to bash both the Germans and bash anti-Semites, but a lot of that got censored out for a little while by his sister, whatever, historically strange things. But one thing that they liked about it was that there are strong people and there are weak people, and the strong people should rule. Right? And there is a sense of that in Nietzsche. At the same time, he wrote these books that sort of invite you to be great. He makes the subtitle of one of his books is the title of the book is Thus Spoke Zarathustra. He creates this whole character and this whole fiction of this Zarathustra, this great man. And it's a strange book. But the subtitle of it is A Book for None and All. Right? So in a way, he's not trying to tell you what to do. He's also not saying if you're weak, you're just weak. He's saying, no, there is a beautiful will to be had if you can get there.
Yeah. Okay. And hearing you, man. All right. So my thought right now is that, like you just said, if you can get there, so is a point in getting there trying to have a will that just runs on residual, so that way it's just in the background, willing you to be great. That way you have more, you can have the sensation that I asked you about of what's going on in life. If you have a will that you train to just run automatically and in the background of I don't know, however you will is.
Yeah. But not to make it too complicated, but for Nietzsche, there's no background. And that's why his notion of will might be different than this guy from Pantera. Because for Nietzsche, you're not just this person who secretly wills something. You are what you do. That's a key idea in his philosophy. There's no difference between you and what you do. Talked about this a little bit in the talk with Thaddeus, right? That language, English language, Romance languages in general, in English and German, we have subjects, I, and I say, I run. But who's this I that's separate from the running? And the example Nietzsche gives is lightning. We say the lightning strikes. Well, what is lightning that doesn't strike? What's that? But by saying that there's a lightning that lightning strikes, we're saying there's some secret thing called lightning that's separate from it actually striking, that is actually in control. And Nietzsche says, no, it's not the way it is. We're kind of like, our will is everything we do. It's not the thing that's in control, right? It's a summary of all the things we do, all the things we tend towards, right?
So it's all one ball of energy, and is it broken down into like three, like you not broken down, I guess, but it sounds like even though he's not saying they're separate, in your mind, you they can still be running at the same time, or it's all one, but you could still break them up in your mind. Does that make sense? A little bit like there's health, right? Because that speaks to our carbon, we're carbon-based creatures, and he brings up health. And then the other one would be like the will, and then the person, us, playing the game of all together going as one. But is there a little bit of that, or no?
Not at all. So he gets rid of that. There's no driver.
Okay, and that's where I'm stuck at. I'm stuck at the driver.
I know, it's a huge leap, right? Because the rise of like the Enlightenment philosophy, right? The rise of science and 16th, 17th century, right, is all about my free will, me as an individual. I am this thing. I have rationality. And Nietzsche says, no, right? Like he says, most of your beliefs you think are in your head. They're coming from your stomach. They're coming because you're eating the wrong food or you have indigestion. So, like you look at these, which is easy, right? All you got to do is look at all the politicians. They don't look very healthy, right? They look terrible. And their beliefs are just from eating the wrong things, not just food, but eating the wrong ideas, reading the wrong books, being around terrible people. And so their wills become contorted. I mean, it's incredible when you look at politicians. They look fake, they look sickly, they look like very strange human beings. So like the title of my book is Reading the Way of Things, right? And the idea for me is that things have like you throw a ball, it has a certain momentum, a certain way of spinning through the world. So imagine you, me, all of us, we're kind of like a ball. Or nature sometimes compares us to a roll of the dice.
I'm a sports guy, so the sports stuff, I'm going to catch on real good to the sport. Anything.
Okay. Good, right? So we're like, the universe in a sense has tossed us. And we think we have this thing that we call our will or our mind or our rationality that's in control. But Nietzsche says, no, your will is all your things. What are the things you desire? What kind of things taste good to you? Right? I have a will to booze. I drink. I'm not a fall down drunk, but I drink, and I have a taste for it. Often the women I date don't have a taste for it, right? Very different wills. And sometimes there's conflict, but that my will is my stomach, my ability to digest, my taste. What do I desire? How I do drinking and being drunk or having the effects, and what do I want in all these things? So my will is not a seat, like someone playing the game or driving the car. The will to power that Nietzsche talks about, or the will for him, is how you go in the world, just simply how you go. And it's possible to train yourself to do differently, right? Like the guy from Pantera had something in him that he could summon to break this relationship he had with heroin or whatever it was. But that's part of his will too. Both are his will. His addiction was a will, right? And his breaking the addiction was a will. Does that make sense? You are that roll of the dice. You are that tumbling and that number. You're both. It's necessary.
Yeah,
necessary.
Yeah, when I was driving today and thinking of, you think about the interview and all that, and this would be a question. I mean, this is how I thought of it too. A different way of thinking about it too was that, when people say, when people die or whatever, you have your will, but your body is dead, but the energy that you're still trying to portray into future time, you have to have your witnesses there that you wrote your will and good, that you were in good health or good, mental. And that will goes into time past your death, and all your wishes and all that in there. So that's why they call it a will and testament, I guess. I mean, it's kind of like I reverse engineer it, but it's that energy was still in there,
That's brilliant. That's really, really brilliant. Yeah, I never thought about that. That's definitely what it is. I mean, even if it wasn't intended to be that, that's what it is. Who cares what they intended? That's
because your body's dead, but everybody respects your will.
Yes,
it's written down. You wrote it. It's or whatever, or one of your brothers wrote it or whatever. One of your
lawyer siblings, exactly.
Yeah, so that's cool. That's cool. I think a lot of people are gonna be able to chew on a lot of these ideas here, and we'll move on a little bit here. So you have a PhD in rhetoric. What is that about? Because well, you know what, that okay. So that's my first, and you're my second person I know that has a PhD. So it's it's not that just doesn't happen around my hood over here. So
it is, right?
PhD in rhetoric. What is that?
Yeah, it's funny. So like I said, I finished college. I was interested in this certain kind of philosophy, which was French philosophy, 20th century, call it postmodern. They didn't teach that in philosophy departments in the United States. So what I studied and call philosophy in the United States, that's not considered philosophy. The philosophy in the United States, if you study it at a university, is based in logic, and it's really comes out of both the United States and England.
Is it like those old school names, like the Plato and this or that, or no, it's something else?
No, Plato.
Or not Plato. What is
they
it?
study Plato and they study Aristotle, although
All of those, right?
Them too. But then it's Bertrand Russell, right? And it's Frege, and it's these logicians. And you write a paper in a philosophy class. It's usually you have to make your assumptions, and then what you can derive from those assumptions. And so I didn't want to do any of that. That doesn't interest me. I was interested in this other thing, and it shows up as part of different kinds of departments. But this was, 1991. It was very hard to find anyone doing this. But at University of California, Berkeley, they had something called the Rhetoric Department that did focus a good amount of the department on this certain kind of French philosophy. Now, rhetoric is a subject a lot of people have in college, maybe sometimes in high school, but they understand rhetoric to be learning some basic argumentative logic, and it's like in the university, it's usually the thing that's focused on the teaching of writing. Weirdly enough, that's what rhetoric usually means in the American university system. You're studying rhetoric, what you're studying is how to teach writing. I didn't know that when I got there, right? I didn't have any association with the word rhetoric. It's not a word that really came up for me much as in college, but I knew this department was where I wanted to go. And it was the only school I applied to. Back then, grad school wasn't that competitive. But once I got there, I became obsessed with rhetoric. In fact, I'm one of the few people who went through that department who actually wrote and studied rhetoric itself, and the history of rhetoric. And my dissertation, right, my graduate thesis for my doctorate was a theory of rhetoric. And I taught the introduction to the major, and those lectures were coincidentally, relatedly to our conversation, were podcast by the university. And this is super early in the days of podcasting, right? They were put out on iTunes U, used to be something. Those got very, very popular. And what happened is people started contacting me to be on their podcasts. So that's a weird aside. And those, you can find those classes still online. But for me, rhetoric is a whole approach to life that's different from philosophy. So philosophy tries to isolate truths, right? They want to find an answer that's different from what's here. All this is happening, but the answer is something else, right? The answer is that this world is just a weak representation of what we can't see, the ideal world, right? That's like Plato. There's an ideal chair in the world, and then there's the chair, which is a little less than real. And then there's the drawing of the chair, and you keep getting further and further away from the real thing, which isn't part of this world. Or the German philosopher, Immanuel Kant, tries to figure out what is a universal moral? What is the rule I can come up with that says this is true and the right thing to do for all people across all time? And so what they're always trying to do is find answers way up here. But rhetoric isn't interested in that. Rhetoric believes that you're always you, and you're always dealing with a situation. So if you can ask a philosopher, what's the good? And the philosopher will go, well, the good is what any individual can do that every individual can do. That's what Kant says, right? It's only good for you to do if everyone can do it. And if everyone can't do it, then you can't do it either. Right? Ask a rhetorician, what's the good? And their answer is always the same. It depends. It depends on the situation. It depends on who's in the situation. It depends on a million factors, including who I am and what I want. So rhetoric, rather than leaving this world Rhetoric is more like Nietzsche's amor fati. It loves this world and all the things in it. It doesn't have, or doesn't even want to have truths, right? It's more interested in what's effective, what happens, not is this thing true, but what happens if we say it's true? What are the effects on the world? It's always interested in how the world itself is happening, right? What are people experiencing? Not ignoring what people are experiencing to say, so X or Y is true. So rhetoric is, I like to say, it's both the theory and the practice of making sense of life that's always changing, different circumstances. It's all in motion, right? So what's true for me today is not going to necessarily be true for me tomorrow, right? We change all the time. So it's the art, the theory, and the practice, or the art of making sense of this life, operating in it while you're moving yourself. So you can't stop it, try to step outside it, decide the right thing to do, and then re-enter, because you're always inside life. There's no outside of life.
So this type of the rhetoric is also a good characteristic to have as part of your will too, because it allows you to stand your ground as life kind of goes around you without getting too far away from things. Maybe a little bit like that. So how would you apply it to everyday life? Like when I was hearing you right now, I was thinking of a situation where, I like to think that I'm like that. Like it takes a lot to get me upset. And if a waitress comes and it's just not her day, I'm the guy that would be like, it's just not her day. Who knows what she had? She probably had this, that. Who the fuck knows, man? Like and I always give people the benefit of the doubt on a lot of things like that. And I'm thinking that helps me not get too far from where where I'm best at, which is within myself, and not let my emotions get too far away. For them to dictate where I'm going. Is that kind of what you're saying? I mean, I don't know anything about rhetoric, but when I'm hearing you talk, that's how I'm reading it. Like
that's one way, right? I like what you said, because one of the exercises they used to do in the classic, rhetoric's a very old tradition, right? It goes back to the times of Socrates, right? It's a very old thing. Although it went away for a long time, rhetoric departments, and then they sort of came back, English departments. That's a new thing. But rhetoric's actually quite ancient. But one of the practices that they would teach in the old ancient schools of rhetoric is they give you an argument or a situation, and you have to see it from every perspective. You have to understand every argument. So just like you're sitting there getting your food, you're seeing it from her perspective, right? Like you're understanding that there are all these other perspectives. And that there's no absolute should. There's just you eating. There's her. She has a whole life. You have a whole life. So it goes, right? It can be complicated, because you can be both frustrated with her and understanding, right? Life is complicated. It's less about standing your ground. There's a good figure for it, I think, is this Deleuze and Guattari, who I'll be teaching that seminar on. These French philosophers, a lot of the time they wrote together. They were two different. One, actually, Guattari was a psychotherapist, he was a psychologist, and Deleuze was a philosopher. But they wrote a bunch of books together. But they use a figure of the nomad, right? Which is a great one, because what's great about the nomad is he's always at home, but he's always moving, right? As opposed to digging in and making a really firm foundation. The nomad says, you know what, I'll take my foundation with me. I don't need a foundation. But I don't lose myself. I can I'm always at home, and I'm never at home. Right. So it's not about digging in while the whole world's going on around you. It's about moving with the world and knowing how to operate in it. Bugs Bunny was a great rhetorician. And I'm a big Bugs Bunny fan. And Bugs was great because he never just gave in to other people's way of seeing him, right? Elmer Fudd wants to hunt him and shoot him. He doesn't just run away, because that would be the traditional easy thing to do, right? There's the hunter and the rabbit's the hunted. But instead, he puts on a dress and pretends he's a girl. He operates, right? He doesn't also try to get rid of Elmer Fudd. He changes the conversation. He's an operator, right? He changes the very terms of how he's being looked at, right? So it's not just food now. He's a pretty lady. Or there's one great one where he's in the pan being cooked, and he starts talking to Elmer Fudd. He goes, "Oh, I know a better way to cook it," and he gets out of the pan to show him a better way to cook. Right? So he's not
makes adjustments.
He makes adjustments. He doesn't dig in and go, "That's wrong," and put up signs and say, "Get rid of hunting." Right? He doesn't make an absolute law about all things. He just operates in this world for his interests, right? That's still kind of fun for him.
Hey, what's up, everyone? I don't know how you deal with stress, but I know how I deal with stress. And I'm a little bit strategic on it. If I know that I'm going to be put in a stressful situation, or a situation where I just need to take the edge off of some of the self-doubt noise that sometimes creeps in the back of your mind, I take CBD products. I cannot do my normal functions on THC cannabis products, because then I'll be a little bit too much in my mind and I won't be able to function the way I know some people can, and that's good for them. And it's good that they can do that. I'm not one of those people. So I need to take CBD products. So please check out palomaverdecbd.com. That is my wife and our family business. Use the promo code chingazos and get 25% off anything in the store, and help my efforts here on this podcast, and support a small family business. I appreciate your support. Thank you. Yeah. So at what point do you stand your ground? On what do you stand your ground on? I mean, does there never? I mean, is there never a time when you're not supposed to? Is that a principled stance to do, or sometimes you do have to stand your ground, or no?
Tell me what the answer will always be for the rhetorician, for the practitioner of rhetoric. It depends. I can't tell you. Sometimes yes, right? Like sometimes no, right? I think one of the issues where I shift, let's say, from Thaddeus and from, let's say, lots of people who out the periphery of my world maybe call themselves libertarians and try to argue all the time. And I'm like, well, that's not free. If I am always personally fighting something, well, then I might as well be the subject of it. I might as well be oppressed by them. I'm just living by their rules, right? So my approach to the political and to the social is more like Bugs Bunny. What can I do to operate? Which means sometimes lying, right? Like I had a job once. I just did not get along with the boss. And they would, it would come time for my quarterly bonus and they never gave it to me. And I was like, that's so annoying. And so I knew I was actually going to be leaving. I was going to go back to teaching in Berkeley. And so for the last 3 months of the year before I left, I smiled. I told him how smart he was. I did all the things that they thought, that made me look good to them. I got my bonus, I cashed the check, it cleared, I quit, right? I flipped it around for my own uses, right? So the operator doesn't care about truth and lies. They care about maintaining their own health and vitality or their own pocketbook.
Yeah, right? I hear you. To me, that kind of speaks to, and I heard that on one of these shows that I saw you on, that you're a big The Wire fan, and so am I. I try to watch it once, the whole thing, like once every couple of years, and so kind of what you're saying is like, and I forgot. I think it was I forgot what character it was, but he basically says like, every man has to have their own code. And you operate and you make adjustments within your code, but so what? It depends, right? You can take someone else's code and use it if you have to on against them or this or that. You're just playing a game, but something to that effect, right? I mean,
I'll play, and you take one thing I love about sort of the new world, about America, is that we just take whatever we want. People just take a little bit of Buddhism, a little Christianity, a little Marxism, and and the old world people more double down, right? I spent a bunch of time in Europe, and it's much more sort of conservative. But I love this American thing, American friendship. You grab whatever you want that serves you, that doesn't. It's not serves you to be up and above everybody else, but to serve your health, to serve your vitality, to serve your pleasure. I think pleasure is a forgotten figure in the way we think about the political and public. I'm trying to write this book about it. So I think pleasure is, we think we're a society that likes pleasure, but we don't like pleasure at all. In fact, we do everything we can to eliminate pleasure. But
can you kind of elaborate on that? So what are you trying to do in your book there without giving, I guess, a lot out, but like what is
I don't, it's not a secret, so pleasure, I believe, is a kind of, what I like about pleasure is that you can't, it's a state of this inside me, right? I could be experiencing unbelievable pleasure while we're talking. No one would know it. It's such a private state that I think as a society, it's for all societies pretty much across time, because it's so private and it's so good, right? That you can't really criticize it, right? You can criticize somebody's actions. You can say, well, you shouldn't, be, whatever, having sex with a dead person, right? That's just bad. But if I take pleasure from that, you can't critique my pleasure, and that my pleasure is my pleasure. To be clear, I don't like having sex with dead bodies, but it's outside of judgment. So what generally happens is pleasure either gets squashed as a bad thing, right? Certain versions, let's say, of Christianity or certain religions, don't have pleasure, don't masturbate, don't have sex, don't do all these things, right? That are pleasurable. Something's bad about pleasure. And it's unclear what's bad about pleasure, but I want to argue what's bad about pleasure is it's beyond your control. It's beyond the control of somebody who's trying to make you do something. What's happened in outside, I think it was born in America, but has really proliferated all over the world, is we have this thing like consumerism. Consumers, I don't want to call it capitalism, because it's not really capitalism, it's really consumerism. And what they've done is substitute pleasure, the pleasure of life, and they've said, okay, you want pleasure? You have to work really hard, and then you can go away for a weekend and spend a lot of money, or you can buy a fancy car, or you can buy some fancy shoes. After you've done all this work, you can go buy something. Think how insane, how smart it is from their perspective, but how insane. They work you really, really hard. People work 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a week. And then they're like, go have your pleasure. And that pleasure involves taking the money you've just earned and giving it back to them. Right? Right. So they've used a certain version of pleasure.
Yeah. When I was listening to you right now talk about pleasure, and how it's so private, I started thinking about like religious faith, and how people, like, their faith could be it could be a form of pleasure, in that it's so private that nobody can question someone's faith, and that maybe that's why the church will knock down physical pleasures down, because they want you to reach a spiritual pleasure in faith. Am I maybe getting these parallels a little bit, or am I thinking?
Sure. I mean, I think you're right. I think institutions you can't get rid of pleasure, so they try to make zones of pleasure that serve those institutions. So like you said, the church, it's not, you can't do those things because then who's going to go to church Sunday morning if they're home having sex, right? So don't do that. Come to church. Work is the great example. I mean, who thinks that setting an alarm for 7 a.m. every morning, fighting traffic, right? To go to some office building that has all open space. In the old days, there used to be your office, you could shut the door. You see this in, did you ever watch Mad Men?
No, I never got into it. I hear it's good though.
It's good, but either way, you get this. They have an office with alcohol and they take a nap. There's some pleasure there. But the last 20, 25 years, we've seen the rise of the open office. So you never have a private moment for your pleasure. And even when you go to the bathroom, usually it's not a private room, right? There's a stall, there's a couple stalls, a few urinals or something. You're never alone. You never have a moment of pleasure. And I don't mean sexual pleasure. I also might mean sexual pleasure. I just mean the peace of your own body, And so think about that. You wake up insanely early. You come home. Your whole life is occupied by labor that is pretty much devoid of pleasure. So what do? They say, well, we'll give you pleasure. We'll feed you. We'll put a ping pong table, right? Like at the Google campus here outside San Francisco, right? Well, that's pleasure. When what I want to argue is that pleasure is an inherent state of living. And what I mean is, the example I'm using in the essay I'm working on right now about it is, I love to touch sometimes, I roll up my sleeve, right? And I like this crease, just, absentmindedly just rubbing it, right? Or letting your shoulders drop and taking a breath and just feeling the wind and senses around you. That's pleasure. Pleasure is slow. Pleasure is private. And those two things go against the needs of both the state and corporations, right? If we really believed in pleasure, nobody would work that much. Nobody's getting pleasure from that. Have you ever been? I mean, it sounds like working construction. You're not stuck like on a commuter train at like 8 a.m. But have you ever been on one? I mean, it's at 8 a.m. and then again at like 6, 7 at night. Oh my God, everybody. They look dead. They look like they've had the life drained from them, which they have had. They've had the life drained from them. And having, some free sushi at lunch, that's not pleasure, right? It's a distraction from actual pleasure. Pleasure is slow. Pleasure is private, and those therefore exist outside what those institutions want from you.
Yeah, maybe it's just me and the way I'm hearing you. So I'm not religious, but how when people talk about, okay, I don't know a lot of this history. You might help me out here a little bit, but it was like the when the Catholics would make you want to go to like the church, and then the other side started, like Protestants or whatever, started saying, oh, you don't have to go to that. You can find it within yourself or stuff like that. It kind of sounds like a little bit of that. Not to say that you're saying that it's pleasure is religious or nothing, but that people need to either find it more within themselves in a way to, I don't know, combat the stresses of life, or just to enjoy life, or something like to that effect, or am I saying that a little?
Yeah, I mean, imagine a society in which pleasure was privileged, and that said, one of the things we want people to be healthy, and we want people to enjoy pleasure, have pleasure. Everything our society does is against those two things. It doesn't want you healthy, and it does. Healthcare costs too much money. We're sitting at our desk all day long. We're plugged into these machines. It's not healthy. What would it look like? What would the world look like if we all agreed pleasure is good, right? Doesn't everybody want pleasure? Well, that means, not having to wake up. I don't believe in alarm clocks. I don't, I work now for this crypto company. It's my first real job. Otherwise, I worked for myself most of my life after that bad experience with that boss. But I like this team and all that. But I don't have meetings before 10 in the morning because I don't want to set an alarm. I'm a 51-year-old man. I'm not giving up my pleasure, right? Think about it, if you have to get up at like 7:30 in the morning to beat traffic, that bleeds into the night before. It means, well, I got to go to bed earlier. There's certain things I can't do. I can't have another drink. I can't go out with you, buddy. I can't go do that thing. And you wake up in the morning, it's a time to meditate. It's a time to move slowly. It's a great time to have sex. It's a great time to masturbate. It's just so much in the morning. Who wants to get up to an alarm clock, jump in traffic? I mean, how did we end up there?
I know. Right? I got one at 2:30 tonight for a 4:00 concrete pour.
No way, 4 a.m.
Yeah, so I got to wake up at 2:30, but it's the life. It's the life that it's the life of construction. So speaking of pleasure, that's funny because I find pleasure in those days when I do have the pours, and I'm blessed to have an amazing wife that she knows on those days I set up my days and I come home and man, I'll take a badass nap like around noon, and it's like those naps after those early pours, like I got some good dreams. I turn off my phone too. I'll call everybody like, hey, if you call me and my phone's off, so I'm not gonna, and I'll take these power naps or whatever, just like, I wake up feeling pretty good after them. I'm not really awake. I'm asleep, so I don't know how much pleasure I'm getting, but they feel pretty good,
Sleep. My last long-term girlfriend, she taught me this great thing. She said sleep is one of the most pleasurable things, maybe the most pleasurable thing. And the thing that she loves, that we all do sometimes, but she had me come to focus on it, was that the time sort of when you wake up in the morning and you fall back asleep, you're kind of awake, you drift in and out of sleep. So you constantly have the experience of falling asleep over and over again. And each time, oh my God, it's akin to, let's say, something like an orgasm, because it's so all body. It's just, you feel everything give. And our whole society is set up to have you never be able to do that, and it's, so pleasure, I want to argue is revolutionary, right? It breaks all the structures of control.
Yeah. It's interesting that your girlfriend or your previous girlfriend said that, because that's one of my, one of my mom's, like I have like a life lesson that my dad gave me, and one of my mom's, or not one, the life lesson she gave me, she was just like in Spanish, but she had just said, to sleep is to live. And she never really told me what it meant, but the way I took it as I got older was that, you do everything you have to do the right way, whatever you got to do. So that way, when you do fall asleep, you sleep badass and maybe enjoy your sleep. But do all the good things that make you put your head on your pillow and just go to sleep and enjoy the sleep or whatever. So she says, to sleep is to live, and I took it that way,
I love that. I mean, it's so funny to think that your instinct, I could see when we were talking, was, well, sleep, you said, I don't even know if it's pleasure because I was asleep. You know, right? Because sometimes we wake up and it wasn't good sleep, and that. You're like, oh, I slept badly. Even though you were asleep the whole night, it's restless or anxious. So we know that when we're sleeping, we're living. And it's a beautiful mode of life. I'm a terrible sleeper. I'll be honest, right? I wrestle sleep more and more as I get older. But I know it's this enormous source of pleasure, right? And then there's a whole nother world in there of dreams that I don't dive too deep into, but I know there's a whole world there, lucid dreaming and getting power from your dreams, and being able to really work with your dreams. And a lot of writers who I really have influenced me spent a lot of focus a ton on their dreams, and I haven't, because it's a whole nother world that's so complicated and demanding. Anyway, that's my take on pleasure.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I on some of my notes here that I had on you, I want you to see if you can kind of expand on this, because I thought it was very interesting when I heard you say it. And you said something to the effect that thinking is the process of linking things together. And my brain just went into like all the connections of, and I guess maybe even I thought of my brain doing all those neurological connections, and like I just envisioned that, and kind of like, so I don't know. Can you kind of like what you meant by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of just what you just said, that the act of thinking is the act of making connections. And often the way we're taught in schools is sort of opposed to thinking, because what they want you to do is it's kind of like a hierarchy, right? So when you're in your English class, you just do English, right? And when you go to your history class, it's history, right? And you're supposed to learn all the facts, and you're supposed to just be able to play them back. You don't make connections from, I remember when I was writing my dissertation, and all of a sudden I had this image of a book is an equation in calculus, a differential equation in calculus, right? Because it's infinite, right? But it's particular. And all of a sudden, we don't have to get into that, but I saw this great connection between calculus and what I was working on. And then, the role of the stomach. Nietzsche talks a lot about the stomach and the body. And Deleuze and Guattari too, and they move between all kinds of worlds. They'll talk about birds and music and art and concepts, philosophical concepts, and then their own experience and different foods. And they're constantly moving between all these things to make these kind of connections, not to unify them, not to say this and this and this are equal to each other. That's not what I'm saying at all. And that's often what I'm saying gets translated as, right? It's like, well, let's find what's common between history and physics and calculus and the body. But I'm saying, no. It's about making weird little worlds, right? And saying, oh yeah, I see this, and I can plug this thing into it. And the way in this chapter in this book of Deleuze and Guattari, they talk about bird songs, and they're talking about a little boy leaving his house humming, and how he hums a song is how he sort of builds his ground, like we were talking about. It makes his kind of ground for him, so he feels safe when he's out of school, and how it repeats. And then they start talking about birds and how birds will occupy space through songs, right? And then they start talking about marching bands that don't do that, right? A marching band, like a military band, is about just banging the same thing and keeping everybody in line. And then, so they're talking about the military, and they're talking about different kinds of rhythms in music. And they're talking about birds, and they're talking about how human beings find peace in the world. And then they talk about how Freud, a psychologist, read the little boy singing to himself. They're making connections. It's not all one thing, but they share a kind of, reading that chapter in the book let me see the world differently. Their thoughts became a kind of lens in which I could suddenly see the world. And birds weren't just this other thing like animals, but they were intimately connected. The song of the bird I wake up to is connected to how I feel when I'm walking down the hall humming to myself, right? That these worlds are all connected, and it's the thinking, their thought let me see the world differently because they made these different connections between things.
So the connections they were making, these different connections, you try to, it allows you to travel in the space within, right? Or between, right? Between all that stuff, right? I mean, that's where you're trying to travel, and you can get to those points or connections they're making, but you don't have to. You can still just travel around them, right? It's good.
That's beautiful. Oh my God, I love that. I'm going to borrow that from you. I'll give you credit. But yeah, it's the movement. It's not coming up with the answer. Like, I think we sometimes think thinking is coming up with the answer. And sometimes we need an answer, depends on the situation, right? But the act of thinking is not seeking the answer. It's the very act of in between, moving in between things.
So like if you saw somebody or if you heard somebody talking in that way and all that, you would respect it as like, oh, that person's thoughtful, or that, or in the way you think of it, if somebody being, or someone that thinks, and then so you would consider somebody that just recites normal lines. He's just a robot or something like that, right?
Exactly.
You want to hear or talk to, or interact with people that are making connections of all different types of things, because it allows you to have space to play within in those connections, right?
That's brilliantly put. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. That's how I think of it. That's actually why I think writing is thinking, because writing is this act of making connections, right? Between words, between ideas, between feelings, because you want people to feel a certain thing. It's all these different, when you're writing, you're creating a kind of space of ideas, of rhythm, right? Long and short words, long and short paragraphs, right? I mean, you ever pick up a book and there's no paragraph breaks, or the sentences are really, really long. And then you read another one and it's tight little, sentences or tight little paragraphs. So that's what writing is. It's a rhythm. It's a piecing together of different ideas, different feelings, different words. And so I always encourage people to not see writing as a translation of my thoughts, but as thinking itself. So when I sit down to write, it is the act of thinking. Sometimes I'm just recording an idea I already have, but very rarely. That's for like my notebooks. I keep my notebooks right next to me all the time because I just want to like remember an idea I had. I'm getting too old to actually remember it the next day, so I write them all down. But when I sit down to write, which I try to do I do several times a week. I turn everything off and I just let it come. Whatever comes, comes. Right? And that's a luxury, right? Sometimes I have to write for work and I'm writing a particular thing, or I have to write for a project, or, but the act of writing is an act of thinking, inherently.
Just manifested into letters and words and stuff like that. But it's brought into a dimension of on paper, I guess, or whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. I'm not so everybody's different, I'm not a good reader. I don't read I've never really read a lot of books, or a really good writer or anything like that, but I'm a good listener. So, everybody, I guess, can has their way of intaking information, and I guess trying to interpret it the best way they can. You have also said that so this kind of goes into that language is a way of control, or that I've also heard, and I don't know what your take on this too, that certain types of languages, like that the English language is kind of like a war language, or like the Germans is kind of like an engineering building language. Spanish is kind of like I don't know, like a seduction language. Like I don't even know if a lot of that is true, but is there some truth to that? And then you've also said that it kind of represses some it keeps people I don't know, like in a box sometimes, I guess, the language. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So there's a bunch of ways, right? So one thing, like we talked about earlier, in English, we'll talk about the Romance languages have a neat trick they use. But in English, we say I run. I can't just say running. I say I run. And so it automatically creates a subject and a verb, that I'm different from my running. So already there's a whole ideology. There's a whole system in our language that you can't operate outside of. And so it becomes very interesting to try to begin to break it, so that I don't have to always be that subject. I don't always have to be the I can be weirder. There was a writer, Kathy Acker, who I loved, who died a few years ago. She never kept her pronouns consistent. First it'd be he, then it'd be they, then it'd be we. So you as a reader, you're constantly disoriented, right? But it was her way of finding freedom, right, in the restrictions of language. William Burroughs, not one of my favorite writers, my favorite writer, he would do something called the cut up. And he would cut up some of his own writing, cut up other writing, newspaper, Shakespeare, and just pull them out, piece them together. And it's his way of breaking the control of language and finding new relationships between things. I taught writing for years at Berkeley, which I loved doing because to teach writing was to teach thinking. Right? And one thing it was at UC Berkeley, it's all these kids who think they're like the smartest kids in the world. They're like freshmen, and they've all been taught this terrible mode of writing, which was, they even would draw it on a board where it was like an upside down triangle, right? So it started like an upside down pyramid. And they would start with these big claims and then try to plug everything in. And it was the opposite of thinking. It was like just sorting, like kids, my boy was little. I never did this to my son, but kids are often asked, put all the red balls here, put all the blue balls here, put all the green balls here. And then you can see if they can sort and put everything in the right bucket. That's what these kids have been taught to do. That's what they thought language was. That language was this thing that they used to convey these ideas, but it was always a hierarchy. They always had to have a big idea and then examples. And I tried to teach them, no, it's about moving, giving people a whole tour of the world between, and that meant sometimes breaking the rules of language. So,
I hear you, man. Like when you did the triangle, to me, it was like a football pitch. So there was the out of bounds lines. So right. those connections and points that they would maybe try to make or point, they're not moving because they're contained within that system. So they can't let their free minds in those spaces we're talking about because those things are too staticky. They're too what I'm saying, a little bit, right? Right.
Exactly, 100%. So one exercise I would do is just called free writing. It's an old exercise that some of the old like surrealist artists would do, which is I'd say I choose some topic, the moon, full moon last night. That's it. Then for 5 minutes, they were supposed to write nonstop. Don't stop. Don't pick your pen up from the paper. Don't worry about punctuation. Don't worry about if you're coherent. Just don't stop writing. And then I would have them read them out loud, and they were beautiful and brilliant. And when they read their papers, they're so like awful and constrained. And then when they wrote this free writing, all of a sudden, another exercise I would do is we read some things aloud, and we read a lot of different kinds of things aloud, some poetry and some philosophy. So they would begin to feel the rhythms of language. And so you're talking about like Spanish versus English, really different rhythms, right? So that to speak Spanish, you have to be kind of different. You have to be in that rhythm, right? When I theoretically, I tried living in France for a little while, and my parents actually live there, and my mom speaks French, and I read all this French philosophy. So I thought I could speak French, which I can't really. But what I did learn was that when I do speak it, I immediately go into a different physical posture, change my body, because that's its rhythm. You can't speak French like you're American. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't flow, right? So each language is a kind of different, it controls our bodies, right? Language is like a choreography. You read, it's the rules for the movement of your body.
I hope it's okay that you don't mind that when you said that, I turned you into Bugs Bunny doing French.
That's hilarious. That's exactly right. I'm terrible at languages. I really am. Everyone in my family was really good at it, but not me. But I got good enough in my French that it's not that I could have conversations, but that I could. This is actually why I didn't like speaking in public, because I didn't like my body like that. I didn't like moving with French. I was like, I don't want to go like that. And then when I'd be on the subways, I would see these North African men speaking French, and they spoke French really differently. And I was like, oh, I like the way they're speaking it. I want to learn to speak it like that. But I'd have to spend so much more time there. It was much rounder, it's much more open, and French can be very sort of very uptight, and they were speaking it they found another way to occupy French that I found really, really beautiful. Now they were kind of Bugs Bunny, a little bit of trickster. They're speaking French, but they're speaking it the way they're speaking it.
Yeah. So let's riff on that a little bit. So maybe because even within their system, which the the black people that you saw, and this goes a little bit to like kind of like Thad's kind of stuff, was that they were probably never taught the pyramid of writing, so they were just able to talk, and everybody else and the other ones were, right? I mean, that's what it is, right? That
Totally. 100, beautiful. Yeah. There's Thad and I were talking about this philosopher theorist, this guy Marshall McLuhan, who talked a lot about media and talked about television. This is super early. If you read him writing about television in the 60s, he already understood the internet. He already saw that television and the internet were connected. But he says freedom lives in the amateur, that the expert is the person who shuts everything down. So in your example, right, the expert is the person who learned French in the French schools, but then someone comes from out, they're an amateur. They can do whatever they want. They're free to move in between. They're free to make connections with the expert. The expert protects their field, protects their domain, and the amateur comes in and is like, well, why does it have to be like that? Why can't you do it like this? Why can't you do it like that? Right? And so they're free to move around, and so, yeah, I think, the colonized become this kind of amateur.
And I think that's some of the one of, or a big part of the aspect of what you're going to be doing with Thad in Renegade University. What he's trying to do too is that, he does want to bring in people that know, but it's a different type of venue than your standard type of higher educational school. Can you kind of speak to kind of what you're going to be doing on Thad's class there? You can speak to the class that you already have that people can get, and to the new one too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's one thing that really excites me about Renegade University. And, Thad's really committed to doing this thing that, has been in the back of my head forever, right? My frustrations with the university system. I'm just too lazy. Like we're saying, Thad's more of a fighter. He's out there doing stuff. I just want to be kind of left alone, and just like bugs, I want to operate, below the radar. But yeah, so the Nietzsche course is just a series of lectures that I recorded all sort of in one shot with that. And I sort of broke down from my perspective how I would approach Nietzsche, and occasionally some close readings in there, but you can just watch them on, at your own pace. Next month, I'll be doing like a live virtual seminar. I wish it was in person. Just like he's been doing, I guess for the last year. So it's just going to be three nights, I guess, over one week apart, and I'm going to try to make sense of these very seemingly difficult philosophers, Deleuze and Guattari. But my job is, what's liberating is I don't have to be like in graduate school and super close readings of these passages and citing everything. I have a kind of freedom to move around, right? To make sense of these guys different ways, and I think I think some of the assignments I'll give, optional assignments, will be like watching Deadwood, the TV show, or I actually think The Walking Dead is another great way I can talk about Deleuze and Guattari, and think about opening the whole class with a video of Jimi Hendrix at Woodstock, right? Because he's doing something that's so different. I could just talk about Jimi Hendrix in this way that Deleuze and Guattari might talk about them, and try to convey some of their very seemingly very complicated ideas that once you get into it, once it clicks, and sometimes it doesn't click, and sometimes only this much will click, and there's a lot of their thinking I don't understand. They write very oddly.
And if someone was to get the class that has no real experience with a lot of these philosophers and all that, or like, what would you want someone to walk away after the class and they'd say, what do you want them to get from this? Or you might say, well, it doesn't matter, it depends, but what would you, what would satisfy, your inner kind of like man, you know what, that's what I wanted, or that's, that's what I want, like, what is that you're
That's great. Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. Teaching's so weird, man. Because you never know. You're saying all these things. I'm up there, I'm talking, and then I never know how it's going to get played back, what people are doing with it, and teaching these guys, it's not about mastery. And Deleuze and Guattari are very hard to master. So I don't want them to leave as experts, right? One of the great quotes from Deleuze is a concept is a brick. You can use it to build, or you can use it to smash a window. So I want them to begin to see these operations, and what they kind of bring into being is this world, kind of like we're talking about, that doesn't have a center, that's nomadic, and understanding that there are ways and figures of thinking that are so different than the ones we use, that are so beautiful and reorganize life in these very beautiful, very generous ways that allow the world to be more and more different, right? That rather than trying to make everybody unified, we all believe this. I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I believe this. Their world is a world that constantly reorganizes across boundaries, across lines, mixes weird things up together, and is always particular and different. And so I'd love people to walk away and be like, oh, I want to foment, to help the world be more different. I want to think differently, right? I mean, for me, a lot of it's selfish, because I don't participate in like public discourse of politics or read the news or anything, because the way all these conversations are framed, just to enter the conversation, you already have to agree to their terms. And I don't agree with any of their terms. I believe things are particular. It always depends. And the more people who think like that or want that from the world, make my life easier. If everyone was just believed that difference was a good thing, rather than always saying, I'm this, I'm that, but just said, I'm this particular thing. And everybody, imagine Twitter and everyone, rather than just taking a side, I'm a liberal, I'm a conservative, I'm a vaxxer, I'm an anti-vaxxer, you just assume that everybody had a particular position. It would be magnificent. It would be glorious. It'd be much more enjoyable personally for me. I'd take more pleasure in the public. So I think that's what I'd want,
Perfect, man. I thank you for coming on tonight. I'm gonna put links to those classes, and could you please plug in where people can catch you right now? With anything that you got going on?
Well, you can read my book. You can find it on Amazon. I can give you that link. It's good. It's not. I didn't write it as an academic book, so it's the description on the back isn't quite right, because it sounds more academic. It's not academic at all. It's sort of, I think, quite accessible, right? I talk about martini glasses and movies and the Matrix and all kinds of different things. And I used to blog religiously. I mean, just like a madman. But I don't really anymore. So I write sometimes on Medium. I can send the link to my old blog. It's called Emphatic Oomph, which has so much on it, because I wrote so much for like 10 years on it. And there's some good stuff in there. Sometimes I look back through it, I'm like, hey, that's pretty good, which is fun, because I don't even remember writing it or thinking it. But I'm like, yeah, that's pretty good. That's a good thought.
Do you have any plans to put any more content on your YouTube channel? Those short clips, man, those were pretty cool, man. Those were easy to consume, and they're like I said, off air, I had told you that I had sent it to my mother or my in-laws, and they thought it was cool. They were like, what is he trying to say? I was like, I don't know, we'll find out tomorrow, in this interview. And she's like, just like that, she goes, I want to see that interview,
That's awesome. That's great.
So do you have any plans on doing any more, or it depends?
Well, no, one thing that really happened, especially during like lockdown, my life became very, very small, because someone close to me was very high risk. So my world just got very, very small. And I love that. I'm very reclusive naturally, but I found it really, really liberating to have no obligations, including an audience. Right. So I wrote so much over the past like 18 months, but I published almost nothing. And I kind of lost that will to teach. I've been so, and I miss teaching, being in a classroom. And maybe I'll get excited about it again. Hearing you say you got something from it is really kind of excites me. I have my whole little setup. I got my, it's pretty easy for me to do, but I don't know what happened. I just sort of lost the will to have a public,
Well, we here, hopefully Los Libertinos could get more out of you. We hope you find that will to put some more content out there. And thank you for coming on. I have a lot more questions that I didn't get to. Hopefully you can I can have you back on another time. And I hope that you feel that I respected your time.
Oh my God, it's fantastic. This is the best. This is unbelievable. You're really good at this. You ask the best questions of anybody I've ever exchanged with. So thank you.
Thank you very much, man. And peace, man. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, sir.
Hey guys, please check out some of Daniel's content on Renegade University. I'm gonna put the links down at the bottom. It helps his efforts, it helps Renegade University's efforts, and it helps my efforts on what I'm doing here. I'm gonna try to be on that class, and I'll see you there. So please check that out, and have a good night. Peace.